There we go. Hello, everyone. I wanted to share a quick insight real quick. So I just started one of my university papers this week, and I was thinking about something while I was writing it. There is a term in it that is very commonly used, and I was thinking, and one of the things I have done with language is sometimes I like to change it up a little bit. If we have like a common phrase or common term, I like to use different language. For example, you could like switch two words around if they're commonly used in a way, or you could reword it. And I think when we have these common terms and such, we have this proclivity, I think, to associate certain ideas with that term or whatever, and that term becomes its own word in a sense for the purposes of our understanding of the concept. But if we don't look into the words that compose a certain term, if we look at the term as just a whole thing all the time, we don't use ways like rearranging those words or rewording them, I think we run into the risk of not really meditating, reflecting on what those words or what those terms really mean. And I think changing the way we say things sometimes, I think, does allow us to still get the point across while also bringing attention to what's actually being talked about. And so, for example, if you let me see, what was one of the examples I was thinking about? Well, I guess that's not entirely. We don't. I can bring up some examples later, and maybe if anybody puts any comments, we can talk about that too. But I'm trying to think. I am a little bit. I've been working on a lot of things, so my mind's going a mile a minute. What one might say, a lot of things in my subconscious. But I can say from experience that it happens a lot where we'll have a term and then rewording it can definitely bring in a new way of thinking about it that may have been lost because people will often, especially young people, they'll see a term that they're familiar with and they'll focus on it as if it is. As if that term, they think they have an understanding of the term until they really think of the words that compose that term. And then if you change the way it's worded, and people will be like, huh, that's what that means. And not always. And I think even for people who are more experienced with a lot of these terms will often benefit from reflecting on it further. Because we don't always want, at least, for certain terms to come to mean something that they weren't originally intended to mean, and that does happen with language, but it doesn't always have to happen, and it doesn't always have to happen on such a short span of time, especially if the thing we're talking about holds a certain level of importance and significance. We don't always want those terms to be misunderstood, to be misinterpreted. Because that can have devastating effects, right, in the long term. And the mind does often group things together. I mean, and I think of this. Consider this, please. When we're talking about, like one of the things, well, here's a good example, actually. When I try to memorize a number, I don't, like a long number, I don't typically try to memorize it, one digit at a time. Like say the numbers, let's say the number is 1976. I don't typically think 1976 because then you have to memorize all four of those numbers. I typically group those into 1976 or maybe 19 and 76. It makes it easier to memorize because you're memorizing less. You're memorizing an entire number as opposed to four numbers. Or you're memorizing two numbers instead of four numbers. So there's an advantage to that, and I think a lot of people do that subconsciously, especially with language. So if you have a common term, maybe that's like 3 or 4 or 5 words long, or even 2 words long, people, and I think I've done this myself plenty of times, people tend to group the individual components of that word into a single entity, and that makes it easier to memorize. And I think it's generally done unconsciously, subconsciously, etc. But doing that, I think, it definitely can hold issue if when we memorize a term as a whole, as a single entity, if we do it that way, we might actually be depriving ourselves of a fuller understanding of what that term actually means. And when we look at it from its individual components, or if somebody maybe more learned, or maybe just as learned, or maybe even less learned, changes the way it's worded, I think it can cause the person listening to reflect more. However, if they already are relatively familiar with that term and what it means and what it can mean, or what people might think it means, etc., then it doesn't necessarily hurt the conversation. It only seems to really be more difficult in communication if the person listening doesn't understand what people might think that term means, what people what they know that term to mean, etc. If a person isn't as familiar with it, it might take the conversation back a little bit as they think about it. But if the person is well familiarized with the concept, it really shouldn't hurt the conversation, but it still might spark a little bit of reflection over time, especially subconsciously. And I think that's important. I think it's very important to rethink and reflect on the things we say and the things we do, etc., and to really delve into a deeper understanding of these things. I think it's very important. And if we don't do that, we run the risk of losing the quantity and quality of critical, also known as higher order thinking in our society. And I think one of the reasons that higher order thinking skills are so emphasized in education today and pedagogy is because higher order thinking skills, to me at least, are part of the foundation of our other learning. Sure, a lot of people talk about rote memorization as if it's a bad thing. But like when I think of rote memorization in a negative way, I think about it being negative because it's not being supplemented with a real capacity for higher order thinking, for critical thinking skills, critical analysis, etc. It's not being supplemented with something else. And there are certain things where rote memorization may be the primary, even the only focus. And I'm not entirely against that in some situations. I just think that in things like the public school system, in private schools, etc., charter schools, whatever, tutoring, if we focus only on the rote memorization in every subject that's being taught and learned, obviously that's a problem, I think, right? Because part of education is not just learning it's learning not just about this is what you learn, it's also about this is how you learn. Because if we want learners to be lifelong learners, and we all are, whether we want to admit it or not, and if we want to encourage a level of independence, of intellectual, emotional, etc., independence in their learning, and that's something that we all can benefit from, is our ability to learn independently of other people to a degree, even though we all need help from time to time. But we need to push for that independence, that independence in learning, while also showing that it's okay to be a dependent learner at times. But if we don't do that, if we don't push for independent abilities while we're teaching, at least in certain contexts, if independent learning abilities aren't pushed, there's a risk of developing a society where there is an immense amount of incompetence. And that is one thing I am concerned about. There are like two nations I can think of off the top of my head, and I think you probably can guess one of them. And we have to make sure that this is not a problem, right? And again, though, I'm not trying to be negative when I'm saying this, because can I really, at the end of the day, blame someone if they didn't have the opportunity to be exposed to certain things, right? Is that that individual's fault? It's unfortunate, but I also don't think that taking it all out on an incompetent or on a person with incompetence, I don't think taking it out on them all the time is necessarily the answer either. And I think that can be damaging because it might even discourage them from learning more. Obviously, we have to be human in our interactions, but we can prepare people at a very young age, and I've taught at every level so far that I'm aware of, unless the elderly count as a level, in which case I haven't taught the elderly yet. But aside from teaching the elderly, I've taught, well, okay, that's not entirely true. I haven't taught at the college or university or trade school level. So I will clarify. I've taught preschool, I've taught elementary school, middle school, high school. I've taught adults in private tutoring, and also through assignments at my church, I've taught adults. So I'll say this. It might have just skipped my mind where I was going with that. But at the end of the day, I mean, there are opportunities. Oh, that's where I was going with it. At some of the earliest levels, I'm talking 2-year-olds, 1-year-olds, there are opportunities, maybe not the largest opportunities, but there are so many opportunities. And even if you have a whole bunch of small opportunities, that can sometimes outweigh one big opportunity, right? So there are so many opportunities at these younger levels, 1, 2, 3, 4 years old, especially like 3 or 4. But even younger than that, there are so many opportunities to start preparing these children, and even toddlers, infants, etc., to start to develop into people who can garner much more independence intellectually, emotionally, in terms of wisdom, Sophia, etc. There's so many opportunities that we can prepare throughout their life, and it should be throughout their lives, right? It shouldn't just be at infancy. It shouldn't just be at some preschool level. It shouldn't just be at elementary school, etc. Like, as teachers, we have such a responsibility, to make sure, even if not in our class, but at some point in their lives, that our children, adults, whatever, that our students, our learners have opportunities, multiple opportunities for developing higher order thinking skills, critical analysis, critical reflection, critical thinking in general. It is so very important. It's so very important that we do this, that we look out for the safety of our students by preparing them and or by making sure that at least someone else is preparing them. And if we don't do that, then their future, their kids' future, which they might see some of, could be a huge problem. People think of education as a luxury. No. Learning is something we do throughout our lives. When we get a new job, when we go to a new school, if we do pursue education, when we go to another country or another city or another place, when we see family members, when we in our social circles, maybe we go to a wedding, maybe we go to a funeral, maybe we do this or that. Learning how to take care of our house when we're building our house, or if we're repairing something in the house, or if we're learning who to call and who is within our budget to call to help work on our house or a trailer, or a mansion, or whatever we have, whatever our income is and whatever we have access to, how to cook meals if we need to cook for ourselves, or who to go to get the meals within a allocated budget, etc. Every aspect of our life calls for learning. And if we don't help to develop as teachers, if we don't, and even mentors, if we don't aim to help anybody who looks to us for any kind of mentorship, and even in the slightest, or even people who aren't looking for that, if we don't help them when we have the appropriate opportunities to help them, the results could be devastating. I mean, imagine somebody in their 40s who maybe they grew up very wealthy, and this is the first time they've ever had to cook. Imagine that. Imagine and remember, maybe they fell in a something happened, and they have to learn how to cook now. Well, they're going to have to learn to do that, whether they like to or not. And if they have better critical evaluation, critical thinking skills, higher order thinking skills, if they have that already relatively, prepared well and appropriately enough, then they should be able to eventually learn how to do that new thing. And to at the very least, be able to cook a first meal, even if it's not very tasty, something that is edible, right? And but imagine again if somebody who is in that situation and doesn't have critical thinking skills, who doesn't have higher order thinking skills developed past a certain level. I mean, they could literally in that situation starve to death. And if you think this is an extreme examples like this might not be the norm, but they do happen fairly regularly worldwide. And we do have examples of extreme changes in lifestyle, even in North America, even in Canada, even in the United States of America. These things happen, and we have to always be prepared too. Or it's good to be prepared too, because we never know where our society will be going in the near future. You know, day by day, we just don't know. Things happen. I mean, when the Israelis took over a huge chunk of Palestine, it was done within days, not months, not years, not decades. It was done in days. Okay, and if we think that something like that couldn't happen to our societies, if we live in the United States or Canada, if we think that that'll never ever happen to us, that kind of extreme situation, then we're being foolish if we think that's impossible. Things happen. I mean, we could get struck by a rock from deep space. I mean, not deep. It wouldn't be deep space, but from within our solar system, a rock could come and hit our planet, maybe undetected. I mean, things happen. Natural disasters happen. Not just on like a political scale, but on a natural scale. Rocks from outer space. Maybe a rogue, meteor. I'm trying to remember if it's a meteor or a meteorite when it's. Well, anyway, things happen, and natural disasters happen. Drastic shifts in the Earth's plate tectonics, right? In the drastic shifts in the Earth's plates, volcanoes, tsunamis. If you live even relatively close to water. There are a lot of things that can happen. Drastic changes in the temperature. We've noticed some winters where it seems like strangely cold for the area, at least where I live. And we've noticed summers that have been way hotter than expected. The things happen. They do, right? And we can't always plan for everything. But if we have the skills in place beforehand, at the very least, we can be ready when something bad happens. And if nothing bad happens, then at the very least we can better ourselves and better our, living standards from time to time, right? Through higher order thinking skills. So these skills are pivotal. They're incredibly important. They're essential to our daily lives, and they could also prove to be pivotal to situations that are completely out of the blue that we don't expect to see. So just some thoughts. Please tell me what you think. I don't generally get comments on these, I don't think. But if you do comment on it, there's a good chance I'll read it. And there's a very good chance I'll also respond to it. So please share your thoughts as well. And please have a great day. And please please enjoy please enjoy your day. And God bless. Take care, everyone.